All right, thrilled to be joined now by Kyle of the Whack Hoops Nation website and podcast and YouTube channel. All talking all things Whack basketball. Really good stuff here, and I'm excited to have you on here to chat about this conference as we continue our conference preview series. The fourth conference we're talking about. We did ACC on Tuesday. We talked about the Big Sky, talked about the Horizon. Now we're here talking about the Whack, and we're going to open it up with the biggest storylines. Talk about some of the teams that we think that might win this whole thing next year. Some dark horse teams, as well as some award predictions to close us out. But Kyle, I think the big storyline in the Whack this upcoming season is the fact that the team that has won a majority of the tournaments in the last 10 years or so, New Mexico State, is out the door. Of course, they did not end their tenure in the Whack on a particularly high note. In fact, one of the lowest notes in all of college basketball last season, as their season got canceled because of multiple issues throughout the program with some hazing allegations, gun violence, coaching staff got fired. It was a complete disaster to end their time. They move on to Conference USA with a new coach, Jason Hooten, coming over from Sam Houston State, who is also moving out of the Whack and going into Conference USA. Two teams out the door. New Mexico State, again, they made the NCAA tournament in 10 out of the 16 eligible seasons, not counting last year and the COVID year. Of course, they were not going to make it last year, barring an incredibly shocking run through the Whack tournament. Regardless, they won 7 out of 8 from 2011 to 2019. They were always between a 12 and a 15 seed. They still had a couple runs where they went into the second round. I think the biggest kind of move for them was that win over UConn as a 12-5 upset in 2022. It always kind of shocks me that that happened. And then a year later, New Mexico State's basketball program wasn't even playing while UConn was winning the national championship. Two programs that went in completely different directions over the span of 365 days. Regardless, I think even though New Mexico State did not end their tenure on a high note, this is a tough loss for the Whack, a program that was perennially at the top, again, made the tournament more often than they did not throughout their tenure in the Whack in the last decade or so. And even with Sam Houston State, a team that, they went 26-8 last season, 27-9 in 2 consecutive seasons in the Whack. They were only there for a couple of years, but a program that really kind of made some noise in their 2 years too. So you're looking at two programs out the door that kind of had a lot of weight in the Whack conference. And I think it's a tough loss for this conference to lose those two schools.
Well, the interesting thing is the final year in the Whack for New Mexico State was the only year that they did not make it to the Whack tournament title game. Like since 2012, 2013, New Mexico State has played in every Whack tournament championship game. They lost 1 year to Cal State Bakersfield on a crazy last-second buzzer beater. And then 2 years ago during the COVID 2020-21 craziness, GCU finally got over the hump and beat the Aggies. Last year, they go in, show that they're still the kings of the mountain, but then they lose Chris Jans. They lose the majority of that roster, so they had to rebuild the entire program. We saw what happened this past year. I mean, they've been the kings of the Whack since 2012, 2013. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, and it's going to be a huge loss. And I'll talk a little bit about how I feel the Whack is a little bit better than what it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago had the Aggies left then. But, Sam Houston, same way. Like, they were a top 60 net team. I mean, they started out, 7th in the net when it first came out back in December because they had beat Utah. They had beat Oklahoma on that last-second buzzer beater to open the season. And Jason Hooten's just a great coach. He brought in some key pieces for them to be successful. They had some troubles when Whack play started, especially on Thursday nights early in January. They couldn't win on Thursday. Like, it was just bad. But then they'd go and roll on Saturday. So I mean, it's tough to lose two schools that are usually in the top 100, if not higher in the net consistently. I think had these two teams been like, if Sam Houston would have been members of the WAC 5 or 6 years ago, same with New Mexico State, and they left 5 or 6 years ago, we would say this is a huge impact.
Yeah.
But I want to point something out that the WAC was the 11th best conference in America per KenPom last year.
Wow.
The 5th best mid-major in the KenPom rankings. You know, only the WCC, the Mountain West, the AAC, and Conference USA, who had FAU, UAB, North Texas,
yeah.
were above the WAC last year. And that is with New Mexico State not having a typical season that they had. Yeah, Sam Houston doing what they did, it helped big time. But you had Utah Valley, who ended up 58 in the net with their run to the NIT semifinals. This conference is better and more stable than it was, which it's going to hurt to lose the Aggies and Sam Houston. We're not going to deny that. We can't say that that's not going to hurt, because it is. But teams are stepping up now to where somebody else is going to be the king of the hill, and it's in a good place competitive-wise, because you see Seattle going – they've won 43 games under Chris Victor in the past 2 years. GCU wins the WAC tournament this year, and they return some key pieces on their squad. SFA, who's had tournament experience. Utah Valley, 28 wins last year. Like, this is a good basketball conference that's getting deeper, and I feel like it's stronger than where it would have been had this been 4, 5, 6 years ago with these two losses. So it's going to hurt, because New Mexico State has run this conference for so long, and Sam Houston's been really good consistently throughout their history. But I don't think it's going to hurt as much because of how good this league is. And we saw that last year with New Mexico State not doing what they did, where these other schools are at.
And I think you talked about Utah Valley, and Southern Utah was another team, both teams that had a lot of success last year. And they're two of the 3 teams in the conference that have had to make coaching changes, have to replace their old coaches. And that's always a big storyline coming into the season, of, especially with mid-major schools, their top players and their top coaches tend to get poached by higher level programs. That's just kind of part of the deal. And Utah Valley lost Mark Madsen, amazingly not to Stanford, where it seemed like he was a no-brain hire for that team, but they kept Jared Haas on, and they let Mark Madsen get hired by Cal, which is very baffling as a guy who was a Stanford icon as a basketball player. Madsen, of course, brings Fardaws Aimaq back from Texas Tech to Cal. They get some big pieces there. And Utah Valley replaces Madsen with Todd Phillips. Phillips was a 4-year assistant coach, associate head coach for Utah Valley, the guy who was reportedly tasked with helping the big men, so had a big role in developing Aimaq, a big role in developing Aziz Bendago, who had a fantastic season last year and is out the door now over at Cincinnati. So I think you look at this, and for me, Utah Valley, I mean, their coaching tree right now is really solid. Mark Pope, of course, was fantastic there, has been solid at BYU. They weren't great last year. We'll see how they do in the Big 12. But in my mind, there's no doubt Mark Pope is a very solid coach, and Mark Madsen now at the Power 5 level too. And kind of feels like there's some good pressure on Phillips to kind of keep that going. But to me, Utah Valley's in a solid spot, even after losing a bunch of key starters as well as their coach in Mark Madsen.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how – I don't think they're going to be able to replicate 28 wins under Todd Phillips this season. Like, I just if they do, I'll be so happy, because obviously I'm a Utah Valley alum, so I'll be happy. But the key here is the what do I want to say? The consistency, I guess you could say. There's another word that I'm trying to think of that I can't think of off the top of my head, but like keeping a guy who's been there for 4 years, understands the culture, understands what you need to do to succeed. Has had success where he was before he came to Utah Valley. He led Salt Lake Community College to a national title. He keeps the Toulson line intact with, I mean, Ryan Toulson is one of the all-time leading scorers at the school. Jake Toulson was a player of the year when he was there under Mark Pope. Connor Toulson had a big year, and he played for Todd Phillips. And now Connor's brother, Tanner from BYU, is there. So you keep that pipeline there. And like you said, he developed the bigs. He was a big part of that with Fardaws Aimaq, Tim Fuller, Aziz Bendago. So he knows what it takes to win, especially in this league. And he knows he even said it before the NIT game in the press conference, that the WAC is a monster, right? So he understands that. But there's a lot of new faces. I mean, when you lose Trey Woodbury, when you lose Justin Harmon, who's now at Illinois, when you lose LaTrey Darthard, who's at Oklahoma, Aziz Bendago, Defensive Player of the Year, who set a new single season record for blocks at Utah Valley. He's at Cincinnati now. Like those were, and Tim Fuller, who's a dad now, who's moved on with his life. Like it'll be interesting to see what Todd Phillips does, but I think keeping him on and keeping Todd Okeson there as his associate head coach. Plus he brings in Lewis Wilson, who has experience at GCU and other places. So Todd Phillips may have the most success out of the new coaches, if we're being honest.
We got two more head coaching changes in the WAC. You got Todd Simon gets replaced by Rob Jeter. Simon took the job at Bowling Green. He went 118, 106 in 7 years at Southern Utah, although that was with a rough start as he kind of was getting his feet underneath him. He went 65 and 28 in the last couple of seasons, the last 3 seasons, excuse me. So obviously really turned that program around in a quick way. And now they bring in a coach who has over 220 career wins, who's been to 2 NCAA tournaments with Milwaukee, where he was there for 11 years. And he spent the last couple of years at Western Illinois. And then you got UT Arlington, who replaces Greg Young. They fired him after he went 9-16 last year, the first season for Arlington in the WAC. They replaced him with KT Turner, and this is a fun hire. KT Turner was a former player at UT Arlington. He's been a longtime assistant coach. This guy's coached at NAU. He's coached at Wichita State, coached at SMU, where he was the associate head coach. And in the last couple of years, he's been assistant at Texas, Oklahoma, and last year at Kentucky. So, you got a guy with a ton of experience, a ton of recruiting experience in those places. And, and then combine that with Jeter, who's got 220 wins, like we said, in 2 tournament appearances. I feel like these are 2 really solid hires for the WAC. And I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on these 2 hires and what it does for the conference.
Yeah, I like Rob Jeter. I spoke with him earlier this year, this summer, when we did this preview for the Southern Utah men's basketball team. My concern is, one, Cedar City is not easy to recruit to. Like, it's just, it's out there on its own little island. Like, people don't understand Cedar City is in the middle of nowhere in the state of Utah, like, if we're being honest, right? So recruiting there, the facilities aren't great. The America First Event Center is legit, but practice facility and other, so this is going to come down to relationships for Rob Jeter, who he can bring in and who he knows and who he and his staff have established relationships with. But I think he can win there. I think there's going to be some growing pains in year 1 because they lost 6 1,000-point scores from last year. Okay, Southern Utah did when Todd Simon left, and they had a bunch of seniors, Tevian Jones, Harrison Butler, Jason Spurgeon, who followed, Simon to Bowling Green, Drake Allen, who's now at Utah Valley, Mason Falzette, who ran out of eligibility. So, like, there's a lot to replace there, and I'm very interested to see how that works in year 1. I think there's going to be some growing pains. So, but I think Rob Jeter is going to have that team winning ball games and doing big things in the WAC. I love the hire of KT Turner to bring in an alum at UT Arlington, and the experience that he brings in, the understanding of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Like, he can recruit. And, we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but I'll bring up UT Arlington again in this segment, in this episode, because I love what he did with his recruiting class. I love who he kept on the roster. There was one that left that I thought was going to stay. I think everybody thought he was going to stay, but he left. But I love what KT Turner is going to bring to UT Arlington because they have resources, they have the facilities, and he knows how to recruit. He's been with the big boys, so he understands all of that. And I'm excited for what UT Arlington is going to have going this year and into the future with KT Turner.
Well, Kyle and I are going to close out the show discussing the favorites to win the conference and the dark horses, which I think you might have just alluded to a little bit there, to potentially take that auto bid out of the WAC, as well as some end-of-the-year award predictions. All that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Game Time. Life is always so busy, and the last thing that I want to be stressed about is buying tickets to events. Thankfully, there's Game Time, which has killer deals on last-minute tickets for all of the events that I want to go to. When choosing seats for events, I always get stressed about trying to pick the right ones. I'm worried about the view. I'm worried about the sun being in my eyes. But Game Time has images of views from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. They have deals right up to the day of the event, and you can get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, as well as concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee also means you'll get the best price guaranteed. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. But again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute deals, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Kyle, coming back here talking about the WAC, talking about our favorites to win this conference next season, as well as some potential dark horse candidates. Utah Valley was the team to beat last year, 15-3 in the WAC. They did not make it to the NCAA tournament. In fact, that was kind of the one knock on Madsen. He could win the league. He won it twice, but never able to actually win that conference tournament. But again, as you kind of alluded to, Utah Valley, they not only lose their coach, they lose their 4 leading scorers. And I like some of the additions they made. I think they bring in Trevin Dorius from Utah State, a guy who only played 14 minutes per game last year for the Aggies, but put up solid numbers in that time. They also add Drake Allen, as you said, from Southern Utah, a guy who averaged 11 points and 4 assists, a couple other mid-major guards coming in, Kamani Doty and Caleb Stone Carrawell. But do you think, even with all of the changes, is Utah Valley still kind of right at the top there, or do you think there are other teams? I mean, we know Grand Canyon was the team in the big dance last year, so they're kind of right in that conversation as well. Are those the 2 teams for you right now, or are there other teams kind of pushing for that mantle?
No, there's 3 teams that I have right now, and I'll give you mine in order. People, this is going to ruin my overall WAC preview, Andy. So if my WAC fans are listening, it's going to ruin the surprise. I don't think it's any surprise though, because I put it out before. GCU, I believe, is going to be the favorite in most everyone's eyes. Seattle will be probably 2 in everyone's eyes, and Stephen F. Austin will be number 3. At least that's my top 3 in order. GCU just returns, Ray Harrison, Gabe McLaughlin, Josh Baker, Javon Blackshear is expected to be back after suffering that ACL injury against Sam Houston early in January. And then they brought in some key pieces, Power 5 transfers and so forth. So I think GCU is there. Seattle, you can't count them out. Like I said, Seattle had 43 wins in the last 2 years under Chris Victor since he took over. They won a WAC regular season title. And they bring back arguably the best scorer in Cam Tyson. So, and everybody thought they were going to have a drop-off when Darian Trammell left after, the 2021-22 season for San Diego State. Well, they went and won 20 games with a new point guard in Alex Schumacher. So, and then Stephen F. Austin, I think that they have had their roster together, have had it ready since April, basically. And so there's a lot of continuity there. And AJ Kajus is one of the best point guards in the league. People don't talk about him enough. And then they got Day Hall, who's healthy this year after having surgery on his shoulder. So those are my top 3. Those are the teams I think will be competing for that 1 and 2 seed to the WAC tournament. As you know, it's split up in the ladder bracket this year again. And so those 3 I think will be right there.
Yeah, it's funny. I had one team in my dark horse, and it was Seattle U, so maybe not as much of a dark horse. I know they finished, I think, 4th in the regular season standings last year, and I have not hidden this on the podcast. I am an alum from Seattle U. I went to Gonzaga, went to Seattle U for grad school, so I've always been a fan. I've spoken with Coach Victor a handful of times, a fantastic coach. I'm really happy that they kept him on and have given him that role, because he has run with it tremendously. And this is a team that returns 6 of their 8 leading scorers. I think Riley Grigsby is a tough loss, 14 points per game last year, kind of a big guard, which you don't always see in the WAC. And I think he was able to kind of exploit a lot of mismatches. They lose Emeka Udunyi, who averaged just under 4 points per game. But those are kind of really the big losses for this team.
Emeka was kind of that glue guy, right? Yeah. Like he was that do-it-all kind of guy. Riley Grigsby had been there for like 12 years, maybe. I mean, if we're being honest. But they bring in John Christophilus, who was at Creighton, got injured, but he's healthy now, and they're expecting him to kind of step into that Riley Grigsby role. But Branton Chatfield was somebody that Chris Victor mentioned. Kobe Williamson. They've got experience on this squad, and so I think – if they get that third contribution offensively from Christophilus or maybe one of the other guys they brought in, they're going to be right there as they have been the last 2 years.
Yeah. Let's move on to our awards predictions here. We're going to do Player of the Year, Transfer/Newcomer of the Year, Coach of the Year, and then Defensive Player of the Year. I don't want to subject us to attempting to predict Sixth Man of the Year, because it's really early to try to make that kind of guess. I will start with Player of the Year. To me, there's 2 guys who really stand out here, and I'm going to go with the guy on the team I expect to be a little bit better, and that's Ray Harrison at Grand Canyon. He was a first-teamer last year, averaged about 18 points per game. I think he's got the keys to the kingdom again for the Lopes, and I think he's going to put up similar-ish numbers to what he did last year, and I think that's going to be enough for him to take home the trophy. Who do you got?
Yeah, that's who I have. And like you said, I'm pretty sure your second guy is the guy from your alma mater in Cam Tyson.
Yeah.
So we're both on the same page there, because either one of these guys could win it. Like it's, but like you said, I think GCU is going to be at the top, and that'll kind of separate that. So, you know, Ray Harrison went for 17.8 points a game last year. He's the 1,500 point, you know, member of the 1,500 point club. And he was the WAC tournament MVP after leading the Lopes, you know, 4 wins in 5 days to get that, you know, WAC tournament championship. So he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts. We know that's what they're going to do. They're going to put it in his hands at the end of ball games and let him go to work. And, you know, if the Lopes win the WAC, he will be the player of the year. But, you know, we have to say this. If Seattle is right there in the mix, Cam Tyson will be in that discussion too, because he will be the one leading that Seattle U Redhawks squad. So,
and if Tyson's points per game starts with a 2 next year, if it's a 20 and they're, you know, first or second or even third, and he's got a real chance. But that heater that Harrison was on at the end of that WAC tournament last year, I mean, if he plays like that coming into the season, there's no debate that he's going to be the guy in my mind.
100. And the cool thing is, one last thing, Andy, about both of them, they both tested the NBA draft waters and got valuable advice to come back and to work on something in their game. And so that's these two guys are head and shoulders, I feel like, above the rest of maybe the WAC in terms of player of the year candidates.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think you're absolutely right. Getting that feedback is so valuable. Want to move on to transfer/newcomer of the year. And this is a tough one because a lot of the guys who transferred into the WAC are guys who didn't play much at their previous school. So sometimes it's kind of hard to tell, like, what is that role going to look like, etc. But I'm actually picking a guy who did put up really productive numbers at his previous school. And it's a guy, at a program that you alluded to earlier at UT Arlington, and that's Philip Russell, a guy who was at Southeast Missouri State the last couple of years, averaged 18 points and 5 assists last year. And we kind of alluded to Shandal Weaver earlier in the show, a guy who transferred from UT Arlington. He was the WAC freshman of the year last year. He goes to Texas to be a part of their bench unit. And I think a really sneaky, underrated pickup for the Longhorns. I think he's going to be a really valuable piece for them, you know, backing up Max Asmus. But Arlington had a gap, had a spot they needed to fill, and they go get this guy, Russell, who is a high-level scorer and a good distributor. And I think there's a real chance if he's playing big minutes for Arlington, for him to put up the kind of numbers necessary to win this award, even if, you know, I'm not sure where Arlington's going to fit. If they make a big rush and they kind of get in the top half, I think there's a really good chance he's the one taking home this trophy.
Yeah, I mean, how often is it that you see a high-level scorer that comes from another school that transfers in? Sometimes, most of the time, it's a guy that average 7, 8, maybe 10 points.
Right.
But, I mean, almost over 18 points a game at the Division I level for an NCAA tournament team.
Yeah,
like that's a big thing to have, especially when you're rebuilding a roster.
Yeah,
in your first head coaching gig, like that's a big piece, and he's gonna have plenty of minutes, plenty of opportunities to score. And Philip Russell is going to do that. I'm going with somebody who's a little off the radar because he's a JUCO transfer, and only because I've talked to people about the role that he's going to play. SFA's Clayton Southwick from Snow College, 6'8", 235-pound forward, who, from what Kyle Keller's told me, he's going to have the ball a lot. There's going to be a lot drawn up for him because he can do all kinds of things from multiple positions all over the floor. So I'm going to go with Clayton Southwick, and like you alluded to, because I think SFA is going to be up there in the top 3, 4. That may give him an edge, especially with the role he's going to play, because I know Kyle Keller's been extremely excited about getting Clayton Southwick to Nacogdoches. And so I mean, either choice is a great choice because here's the thing. When it comes to newcomers, you don't know what's going to happen. Like Fardaws Aimaq averaged 4 points a game at Mercer, and then you look at what he did over his 2 years at Utah Valley. Aziz Bandego didn't do anything at Akron, and then look at what he did at Utah Valley. So, like, it's so crazy how this works out, but I think these two names are names to keep in mind, like you said.
Well, based on just tossing out Aimaq and Bandego right there, I think we should probably at least allude to Trevin Dorius too, because Utah Valley has a reputation with bringing in those bigs and having them succeed. Moving on to Coach of the Year here. you can call me biased if you want. I'm good with that. I'm going to take Chris Victor. As you said, 43 wins in the last 2 years. I think Seattle U's got a chance to climb from fourth to second or even at the top of the league next year. I think having as much continuity as they have on that roster with Schumacher coming back, of course, with Tyson coming back and Kobe Williamson and everybody else, I think if Christopoulos kind of steps into that Grigsby role, as you alluded to, I think that puts them in a position to compete towards the top and have Victor take home that trophy.
You know what, Andy, I wish I could share my screen and my notes here because we have the same thought on that. Like, I just think that you can't discount because there's such an outlier in the WAC, right? Seattle U is an outlier with the locale and everything else.
Yeah.
That they don't get enough attention. They do when they start winning more, but people don't understand. 43 wins in 2 years. And 23 was the best since like the 1950s.
Yeah.
Right? They won their first ever WAC championship, regular season championship last year, or in 2021-22. And that was with Chris Victor taking over a couple days before the season. Yeah. Okay. And now they get one of the best scorers in the WAC back. They get an experienced point guard, Alex Schumacher, back. They get 4 of 5 starters back.
Yeah.
3 of 4, 3 of 5 maybe. But either way, guys that have experience and that have been in the program multiple years. Paris Dawson should have a bigger role. John Christopoulos comes in from Creighton, and he's a hometown kid too. So they have an edge there where they want to represent their city. And Chris Victor is molding all of this together. Like you said, if they're at 1, 2, maybe even the top 3, Chris Victor wins this award easily because they just keep winning. Like they're as consistent as can be under Chris Victor right now.
Yeah. Final one here, Defensive Player of the Year. This is the one I had the hardest time with because all of the all-WAC defensive players from last year are not in the conference anymore. So I was like, who is going to take this one? I'm going kind of off the grid here a little bit, maybe a bold prediction. I'm going to take Duke Brennan, transferring in from Arizona State to Grand Canyon. And I'm not it depends on the role. It depends on how Grand Canyon plays him. This guy who played literally 9 minutes per game last year at Arizona State, but his per 40 minutes were over 2 blocks per game, about 10 boards per game. He's a 6'10" center. He was like a really high energy guy off the bench for the Sun Devils. And I think there's a chance if Grand Canyon kind of lets him kind of play a big role at the 5, that he could be blocking enough shots and grabbing enough boards to kind of be in that conversation. And again, without a lot of other players returning who were in that conversation last year, I think you look at some of the newcomers and maybe there's a chance that he plays a big enough role to be the guy with that award.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little off the radar. He didn't play the second half of the season last year because he was dealing with injury, but he came back to UT Arlington. I'm going with Shamar Wilson. Their big 6'9" forward, center, or whatever you want to call him, one of the best offensive rebounders in the league before he got hurt. Defensive rebounding, he was right there in the mix as well. If he's healthy, he gives them a rim protector, paint presence that a lot of teams haven't been able to figure out. He's not going to score a ton, but he's going to rebound the basketball. He's going to defend the paint. And he's a shot blocker too. So Shamar Wilson is my guy that I think, especially if UTA is in that mix, like we talked about, it's all about where you finish in the standings. I feel like the other one, kind of surprising that people might not think, I'm going to say the entire UTRGV front court because they have probably the biggest roster in the WAC in 2023-24. I think they have like 6 guys over 6'10", 6'11", multiple 7-footers. So if we have to like make a bold prediction on that, that's where I would go UTRGV big man. But Shamar Wilson from UT Arlington would be in the mix for that Defensive Player of the Year.
Kyle, thank you so much, man, for your expertise on the WAC. Always good to have you on the show and looking forward to potentially getting a chance to talk about this more as we get into the season and see how these things play out in the Western Athletic Conference.
Absolutely, Andy. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and hit the like button to let us know that you're here. We very much appreciate it. We got more of these conference previews coming your way next week here on Locked On College Basketball. Until then, peace out.